I'm Craig Chisholm, and this is your potato technical update from Corteva Agriscience for 2022. Last season began dry, and the early discussion was about whether we would be 1 or 2 sprays short of our expected requirement. However, the rain and indeed blight conditions came along in May, and by the time we got to the rapid growth phase of the crop in early June, we had Hutton criteria being met in most areas. The first outbreaks were in the south and east, starting in Kent in mid-June. Favourable conditions for late blight continued pretty much continuously through the season, though the highest pressure remained in the south and east. Looking at the Met Office data, the temperature can be seen along the top. What's quite telling is that the temperature was cooler than normal through the majority of April when the main crop goes in. And then we encountered wetter conditions in May, which provided the relative humidity that we needed for the Hutton criteria to be met. But it's interesting to note here in June that it was predominantly in the very south and east where that wet weather continued, and that explains why we saw those early outbreaks, rather than, as more usually, in the southwest. It was through Kent into Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire where we saw the greatest blight pressure and the requirement for shortened spray intervals. The growth in 36A2 is the prime driver in the development of the more aggressive nature of the UK blight epidemic in recent years. There remains a proportion of the population resistant to phenyl amides and with reduced sensitivity to fluazinam, both of which must be considered when developing a late blight programme. Finally, a single 41A2 sample found in Scotland in 2021, while not in itself a cause for concern at this point, given the nature of this strain and its dominance in Nordic regions, is one to keep an eye on in the 2022 data. That's the challenge, so what do we have available in terms of chemistry? It looks here like we have an embarrassment of riches. But we don't have chlorothalonil available in the UK. Copper tends to be used predominantly in the organic sector. The phenyl amides have got resistance within the population, so that's not something that we've tended to run with in recent years. And we know we have a degree of insensitivity to fluazinam, so that does rather restrict our options. If we then look at the dithiocarbamates, we have mancozeb available to us currently in the UK, but that has a limited future and has already gone in Europe. We want to make use of that for as long as we can. But we obviously have straight cymoxanil available to us too, as option from Corteva, which may be mixed with mancozeb. Moving on to last year's trials, this is just an overview of our trials in 2021. You can see that at this site we did get very high levels of blight in the untreated crop, but were successful in managing to control it with our fungicide programs. In these trials, every program started with dimetamorph plus cymoxanil at T1. Then for the last 2 applications we applied cyazofamid. In between times, these applications were applied at the intervals described on the slide, right through the rapid growth and stable canopy phases of the crop. So taking the top left one here, we're looking at fluopicolide plus propamacarb on a 7-day interval between the sprays. And as you can see, that did a reasonable job. The blight epidemic started relatively late here, but it did run hard once it arrived. And you can see that when it was applied at 10-day intervals, that was a much greater challenge. Compare that with how Zorvec Endavia performed, applied at 0.4 litres per hectare on a 10-day interval, and you can see that we had significantly better levels of control than the standard at the same interval. It's quite a marked difference. Here's the data behind the trial, showing the blight epidemic in red took off quite quickly after the 16th of August, reaching 100% infection in the untreated by the end of the month. You can see there was a notable difference when fluopicillide plus propamacarb was applied at 10 days versus 7. 7 is the broken line and 10 is the solid. As you saw from the images, Zorvec Endavia using that curative and systemic activity provided significantly better levels of blight control. This next slide shows product use in a programmed approach. In this instance, in the top left, we're looking at fluopicillide plus propamacarb being applied 4 times through the rapid growth phase at 7-day intervals. We're comparing that with Zorvec Endavia applied 3 times over the same period of rapid growth, but on a 10-day interval. Both were then followed by an alternation of mandipropamid followed by dimetamorph plus cymoxanil on a 7-day interval through the stable canopy phase. 2021 performance was broadly similar for Zorvec and the standard used at rapid growth. This was at odds with 2020 when Blight came into the trial closer to the rapid growth phase. However, if we then dropped in a couple of Zorvec Endavias into the stable canopy phase, as here, you'll see that there's a noticeable increase in the level of control achieved, which is a reflection of the late arrival of the blight epidemic in this trial. This next slide shows the data. You can see the red there giving you the untreated development of the epidemic. Because we applied the Zorvec early and the blight came late, we can't see what I call the Zorvec bonus, which we've seen in previous years when the epidemic came in earlier. But you'll see that at SRUC, where we saw something quite different. In Scotland, the epidemic was relatively slow in its development due to the lower summer temperatures in the west of Scotland in 2021. Interestingly here, you'll notice quite a difference between the black line, which is the fluopicillide plus propamacarb with 4 applications on 7 days, versus 3 Zorvec Endavias over the same period on a 10-day interval. The reason for that is the product's persistence. This provided a Zorvec bonus of at least 2 weeks, reaching out into the stable canopy phase. And then you can see in the dashed line the same benefit from using our remaining Zorvec applications during the stable canopy phase. So blight came in later in our trials, and there was lower infection during the rapid growth phase. So what we saw in 2021 was a more pronounced benefit in all trials from retaining at least 1 or 2 Zorvecs for use during the stable canopy phase when late blight infection was at its highest. So our strategy for using Zorvec is not going to change that much for 2022. It's still an insurance policy for managing late blight. We want the cleanest possible start to the programme, and having a good curative material with systemic movement into new growth is going to be of benefit during the rapid growth phase. But then retaining a portion of your strongest material, that being Zorvec, kept in reserve for the stable canopy phase certainly makes good sense. A quick word on Mancozeb. While we have Mancozeb available to us in the UK, we should certainly be looking to make the best use of it, because it does provide a good protectant against alternaria, rather than having to look at adding additional alternative chemical groups specifically to manage it. Without Mancozeb, we have to rely on QOY, triazole or SDHI chemistry. But while we still have Mancozeb available to us, it makes sense to use it in mixture or in co-formulated products. So what to mix with straight Mancozeb? From Corteva, we obviously have Option, which is straight cymoxanil. With Option, you have up to 8 applications available for your crop. Not all labels are the same, so take care that you adhere to the permitted number of applications on the label. Option must be applied in mixture with other late blight actives, so Mancozeb would be one. It would most frequently be mixed with other protectant blight fungicides to add curative activity when blight pressure is high, and there's a good argument to say that given the nature of the UK blight population, we should be mixing option in with single active products to provide an alternative mode of action as part of an anti-resistance strategy. Option, when used, should be applied at 0.15 kilos per hectare. Finally, as I sit here today, the weather is dry, planting is moving on apace, and seed will be going into relatively dry soil conditions. This will, in all likelihood, have an effect on residual herbicides. We may well see some movement of soil, disrupting the seal on the planted ridge, so important to the efficacy of pre-em herbicide applications. This will enable weeds to emerge when we do get moisture or apply irrigation in the next few weeks. This weed flush will require an additional herbicide such as Titus as a post-stem tidy-up. Titus may be applied on all varieties, though not applicable to seed crops. It should be applied at 50 grams per hectare with an adjuvant, providing efficacy against a broad range of broadleaf weeds, and don't forget that it also picks up grasses. I would draw your attention in particular to its activity against couch, which can be quite a challenge. With that, I will thank you very much for listening. If you need any technical support when using Corteva's products, phone the hotline on 0800 689 8899 or visit corteva.co.uk.